Welcome back to Project Command. Today on Project Command, I'm joined by Dean Maye. Dean is a leader at Amazon Web Services, a Harvard Business School alum, and an AI expert with extensive experience scaling startups and transforming large enterprises. He also brings experience leading teams across both finance and technology sectors. He brings a practical, systems thinker mindset to solving complex problems and leveraging technology to drive organizations forward. In this conversation, we break down what it really takes to scale, how to think like a systems thinker within large organizations, and how leaders can turn vision into real-world results. Dean, my friend, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I'm telling you, I am going to take you on the road, man, so you could do my intro. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you doing this, man. This is an interview I've actually been really excited about for a while. You and I have talked a lot about all this kind of stuff, and every time we've talked, I just kept thinking, man, I gotta get Dean on an episode, man. We got to get this out. So thanks again for doing this. We got a ton of stuff I want to get to today, but before we do any of that, can you just tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, definitely appreciate it, Peter. Like I said, I really appreciate you having me here. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm Dean May. My background is technology through and through and business. So I did undergrad computer science at Old Dominion University here in Virginia. While I was there, I built a startup while I was on campus. It was serendipity. I was looking to sort of make a mixtape website or something like that for music, but ended up pulling data from social media sites and making a data aggregation software. And so what I was doing was things like, hey, Peter likes Pepsi. He talks about Pepsi all the time, and these three accounts interact with those posts usually. So I'd aggregate that data, and the goal would be to sell it to, for example, a Pepsi. And I had key accounts and ton of outside success for a bunch of folks on the college in a college dorm room. So that was fun. Got that business out to Dominion Enterprises, where I went as a software engineer, and then ultimately moved on to different places like Capital One, um, as a software engineer, and then a software engineer leader there. Then to GlaxoSmithKline, which is a global pharma. So I ended up traveling around the globe and seeing how technology processes really impact drug discovery, which I got a ton of fun stories about that. And then ultimately went back to Capital One and led a large technology team there in the data movement type of space. And somewhere around there, I built a venture capital fund, small fund we deployed out. And also, as you mentioned earlier, went to the Harvard Business School and studied, focused mostly on finance and quantitative finance, which is like using artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to really look at the market and do some prediction there. So I spend my time advising startups and mid to large size enterprises as well. And so I keep busy, which is my goal. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've certainly succeeded at that goal, Dean. That's an incredibly impressive background, and I think you just might be the exact perfect person for this episode because, well, I think you and I have talked about it. I've been doing an AI in the fire service series for Project Command, and I've really been looking for the right guest to help my audience explain the ins and outs, some of the trends they're seeing, and really like how do you separate the hype from what's real and then scaling that? So, in any case, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll talk about all that. But thank you for that introduction there. That's perfect. And so, with that, what I want to start with is you've obviously been a part of both the finance and the tech sector. You've got experience all over the place. And so now you advise startups. And so you get a chance to see organizations that are, in the beginning stages and they're trying to figure out like what works and what doesn't. And so I guess from that perspective, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with technology? And I'm going to leave that very
Uh,
broad and go wherever you want with that.
I appreciate it. I think, I'm not going to bury the lead. At this point in 2026, the trends it's trend singular. AI is here. It's impacting businesses, and every business leader right now is thinking about how AI will be used to either transform their business top line or bottom line. And that's what everyone's talking about or worried about, whether or not their competitors doing something in that space or not. So that's the huge trend. So there's like usage of AI, and from an industry perspective, I know you're in um, sort of like safety services and how it could be used there, all the way to financial services. Everyone's looking at how AI could be vertically integrated into their chain. And then there's the rise of agentic AI, which we could get into a little bit later, but it's ultimately autonomous systems that can really use the latest developments in technology to figure out how to do work and get that work done. And so those are the trends that I'm seeing.
Yeah. Man, that's really interesting because I do want to talk about all that. I want to talk about, of course, AI. I mean, that's the main reason that, I was really so excited for this podcast, but I also want to talk about agentic AI. But first, when you work with companies and they're looking into AI, what are the challenges that they're running into to use AI?
Well, the first challenge is the how. What do they use it
Mm,
for? So most of the time when I get with a company, they're trying to figure out what they should be doing. They heard they should be doing something. For example, with the advisory that we do at AWS, we actually have the tools and the ability to see when they start experimenting,
hmm,
right? So we see when they start trying something using Claude models or something like that. And it's usually a little blip of a spin. And so we get them on the phone. We say, "Hey, what is it you're trying to do?" And we quickly realize that they don't quite have an answer, right? They went to a conference, they talked to some business school cohort mate or something, and they're figuring they should be doing something, and they're trying to figure it out. So most businesses are struggling to understand how to do something. The ones that are further along run into certain challenges like a lot of use cases are around document processing.
hmm,
Many companies are coming from having highly documented or document driven processes, and now they're trying to figure out. I've seen, for example, one insurance firm that I worked with, they had a lot of very um, structured documents coming in. So they, from claims documents and the like. And before, they're having trouble scaling because they need a human to sort of read through those and do the assessments. And now they're trying to see how computer vision capabilities could help to
hmm.
automate those processes. And it's really hard. There are companies that have figured it out and others that haven't. But that's where I typically see them struggling, figuring out what to do or trying to cobble together something. So I help them to step back and think about, well, what are the outcomes that you're
Hmm.
trying to achieve? And work backwards from the outcomes, identify, high leverage things that they could do within the business and figure out how to measure the success of that and how to achieve it. So that's where I see them struggling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, when you have something so powerful and kind of, I don't know if flashy is the right word, but like AI, sometimes you can end up with that solution in search of a problem situation where you don't even really know what you're trying to do. You just know you should be doing something, so you just start kind of throwing AI at different things, like, oh, maybe it'll fix this, maybe it'll fix that. So I really appreciate you kind of laying out yeah, let's figure out what do you want to do first? Like, what problems are you having? That makes a lot of sense. Seems like a really
Yeah.
logical way to go about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to say that from our abstracted sort of
Yeah, sure.
looking in, but when you're sort of inside of those businesses and you're being forced to come up with answers or something to tag
Yeah.
the AI label on, then it's not as clear, right? You're trying to optimize for bringing something quickly. I think it was a stat I saw, McKinsey or somebody else did a report and it was saying that um, you know 80% of companies, 80, 90% of companies last year did some kind of proof of concept
Hmm.
AI project. And of all of those, only 30% or so were able to bring something out, to production that actually worked, right? And of
Interesting.
that 30%, only some small fraction are still, sort of leveraging those proofs of concept to really have business impact. So the start is everyone's trying to do something. Only a few of them figured out how to get anything done, and only a very small fraction got something meaningful done. So it's a challenging thing for business of all and organizations of all sizes.
It's so funny. That actually really jives with what I've seen and heard anecdotally talking to fire chiefs, talking to my peers in the fire service is that, AI is in the fire service already in so much as there are a handful of people in all these different organizations that know how to use it and have, 5x'd their productivity with AI. And so on an individual level, it's already there. People are already using it, but doing it in some sort of a strategic way where you say, hey, look, we want to take this beyond the individual and we want to look at it from more of an organizational, how does the organization leverage it rather than, a handful of individuals who have massively increased their productivity? How can we scale that or do it at a more organizational level? So that certainly jives with what I've seen.
Right. And once you're doing it strategically, then you could start thinking about how it impacts your operational cost, your labor strategy. There's a lot of things that once you start thinking about it, how to activate your organization and using these things, you could ultimately unlock value, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hodgepodge. I think the good news for anyone that's sort of listening to your program is that not very many have figured this out. You'd be
Hmm.
surprised. You'd be
Yeah.
surprised. I've
That's
seen the
surprising.
biggest names. Yeah, I've seen the biggest names, names that your jaw would drop, right? Some of the biggest names, they don't have it figured out. This is a hard thing to do. To really, this is the equivalent of sort of building a new automated factory,
Hmm.
if you will, right?
Well, that's a great segue. And I'm going to segue into AI in a second, more specifically, narrowly focused. But I just want to say for the fire chiefs out there that are listening, I think when I talk to this, I see a little bit of apprehension because I think that there's this feeling like I'm so far behind. And all my other or not competitors, because we're not competitors in the fire service, but all my other peer chiefs or organizations are already using this. And then, you go to some of these firefighter conferences. I just left one a couple days ago, and you'll see like a show of hands who's using this, and it's just such a small number of people. So I think what you said is really right on, and if you're seeing that in the business world, you can bet we're seeing that a lot on the public safety side. So if you're listening, rest assured you are not as far behind as you might think. But
Yeah.
Dean, I want to pivot here, and I want to. If there's people listening that have heard about AI, maybe they understand it at a sort of conceptual level, I wonder, can you just define AI for us a little bit at a more granular level and just explain what is it? Is it just like a brain inside of a computer? Like what actually is AI?
Yeah. So it's any technology that allows the computer to simulate our human problem solving and intelligence capabilities, right? And so the how that it's doing this under the cover. So to think before when I was doing well, there were emerging AI ML. I remember studying computer science and wanting to get into some of those classes and being underwhelmed when I finally got in there. This
Hmm.
is way back like 15, 20 years ago. But ultimately, uh, artificial intelligence is using these mathematical probabilistic principles to take a look at data and sort of figure out what you know for a problem what could the answer be. So if I sort of asked, if I gave the computer data on all the summer temperatures, all the temperatures for all the summer days, it would be roughly 90 degrees, 80 something degrees, right? And based on that corpus of data, if I then ask the computer, well, what do you think the temperature is going to be next July on this particular day? Well, based on what it's seen, it could sort of figure out, well, it's going to be 85 degrees. Well, that's really a mathematical inference that it's doing. And it's
Hmm.
doing this. And if you sort of, that's a simple example. But if you scale that example up to other things, you could still do the same thing, right? Take in data, look at the trends, and sort of figure out and make guesses as to what's coming next. And where we are today is with the type of computer systems that we have, large scale data centers, almost infinite compute, we're able to feed so much data and do so much crunching that the computers have become really, really, really good at
Hmm.
predicting a great number of things, right? So that's what AI is if I sort of lift the hood up under the cover.
So it really is data driven. Like I guess what I'm curious about is, you talked about 15 years ago you were kind of underwhelmed. the big difference between now and then? Is it the volume of data or is it the maturity of the technology?
Both. So the volume of data. So what's happened since then is the proliferation of internet sites and social
Mm,
media. So we've been creating data, creating
okay.
data, creating data. So data creation's really, really, really grown. New shopping sites, new blogs, new Reddit this, and all of that's the world's information being able to be stored. Then there's also a parallel thing that was happening, which is, cloud computing, right? So companies like Amazon Web Services, Google, and others started building these large global data centers, which these, for all intents and purposes, are massive computers. So you
Hmm.
have the ability, you have tons of data, and you have the ability to crunch tons of data, and that's what's changed.
I
Yeah.
see. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, let's get into one of the things that I have recently. It's one of those deals where like, nobody's talking about it and then all of a sudden it's all anybody's talking about. And that, of course,
Mm-hmm.
is agentic AI or AI agents. So you and I had a conversation, I think it was about a week ago on this subject and I like to consider myself pretty read in on AI and I got to tell you I was pretty blown away by what I was hearing. So, why don't you just tell us what is an AI agent? Like what do they do? How does it work?
Yeah, definitely. This thing, like I was telling you, then this whole thing is moving so quickly. So I told you how AI works and under the covers, and so now, what the researchers sort of figured out how to do was create generative AI, right? Which is
Hmm.
AI that, we don't just have to be able to predict what the weather's going to be based on previous weather. We could predict what the next pixel in an image is going to be, right?
Hmm.
Based on seeing a tons of images, and now we're able to generate new images and new videos and generate new text. And so, based on those innovations, we're able to have a thing that looks and it's almost like a brain. If I put some words in a prompt, it puts some words out and it kind of looks like we're having a conversation like you and I are having. And if we build on top of that, then we're able to take that brain and have systems that can reason. So an agentic system is a system that can take tasks and figure out how to do those tasks, right? Based on the tools that it has available and your intent. And that's what's really changing the game right now. So for example, before you'd have to code a system. I talked about document processing. Maybe you're doing some of that in like um, the safety space, but the public safety space. But a document would come in, maybe somebody would write some code or a human would figure it out how to process that document and then create a report that then goes to a fire chief. I'm making this up. I'm not an expert in this space. But now you just pretty much give it access to the tools it needs, an email account, maybe some place to go fetch the document from. And you tell it, hey, I want you to create a report and send it to the chief, and it figures out how to do that. And that's an
Hmm.
agentic system. And that is what's changing the game right now.
How is it changing the game?
Well, it's changing the game because theoretically, and what we're seeing in practice at a small scale and then that's growing, you're able to take such a system and bring it into a business context or an organizational context. There's no programming needed, so you don't need to be technical. And you could give it access to the tools it needs, and then you could give it open-ended non-deterministic instructions like, hey, solve this problem, go do this, go do that. And that sort of workflow starts to look like what would happen if you had it like a junior employee show up, right? You're
Hmm.
like, hey, show up with your badge. I'm going to give you some instructions, and I expect that based on your training, your pre-training, whether it be college or whatever you've done, based on your experiences, you're able to complete these tasks, right?
Hmm.
Based on the tools I've given. And now the machines are able to do that too. So it's really um, it's transforming mature organizations like public safety and the like, but is also providing a springboard for entrepreneurs. And I play a lot of in the startup space. And now even entrepreneurs are looking at, okay, I could get a lot done for relatively low cost and without having to, raise a ton of money to spin up a large team to test an idea, right? So it's really just transforming businesses of all sizes.
Yeah. Man, that's really interesting stuff. I wonder, we talked about this the other day. Could you explain a little bit about like how to actually get this set up? Like, and we talked a little bit about, I think OpenClaw was one of the big ones. How does that look actually to get this off the ground and get it going? What would that look like?
Yeah, so I think OpenClaw is a personal assistant agentic AI system. If anyone's curious about trying that out, just Google OpenClaw, get there, download it onto your computer, and I think the instructions are fairly straightforward for folks that have use a computer regularly. They're able to do that, so I would try that. There's a ton that you can get done outside of just open Claude, just inside of your chat GPT,
Hmm.
inside of, or if you're using Claude, they're still the leaders in this space, those two companies, and they've created a lot that you can achieve in terms of automating systems. I've seen people automate the reading of their emails through Claude, and the thing reads the email and gives them a summary in the morning when they wake up, and all kinds of things that they find helpful and valuable. So I would say just get started, start small is what's important. Try not to overwhelm yourself with sort of thinking you've got to go big bang. Just at least get an understanding of how the tools work, and don't be intimidated. Everyone's facing, no matter what skill level, everyone's facing the same challenge, right? Open Claw is a new thing, for example, and there are no experts, right? Other than maybe
Yeah.
the guy that built it. So just start small.
So let me dig in on that a little bit. Start small. What are if you let's say three steps. If you were going to give somebody with a baseline level of understanding of how ChatGPT works, three steps to learn more about setting up an AI agent. What would those like? Maybe not even steps, but like what specifically should I go do?
I would first it's easier to get out of the abstract realm and just identify something, some pain point in your life,
Hmm.
or it may be a pain point, it may be something, a first world problem that you want to solve for yourself, like automating the reading of your emails or something like that, or checking the weather and sending you a text message. Identify some use case. And then you're able to get into ChatGPT or Claude and have a conversation with that thing and ask how would I set the or walk you through how to set up the agent yourself, right? So get comfortable, using the tool in that meta way for it to tell you, hey, get in, configure an agent this way, connect this, connect that, go get this thing from your Gmail or whatever you're using and configure that like this. And like I said, just be patient, but have something. Um, the best way to get the dopamine hit is to have a use case
Hmm.
in mind, right? Even if it's just something simple, but have a use case in mind. And that goes for the personal use, but it also scales to the business use as well. Start with a use case in mind and work backwards from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, taking it out of the theoretical realm. I think that's exactly right. It's because then it really clicks for you, like, hey, specifically tell me how to do this. That's, something I've always thought that's so interesting about AI is, you see people write these books like Chat GPT for Dummies or whatever, and it's like, man, why would you go buy that book? Like, literally download the app and open up Chat GPT and say, hey, tell me how to use you, and it'll take it from there. So I think that's exactly right. Like, get the use case in mind and then just like get in there and start experimenting and have a conversation with it.
Yeah, one thing I would say though is that I've learned that my learning style is like that. I'm able to go in and sort of use the tool and it's fine, and I can learn that way. But I've come to appreciate that there are different learning styles, and
Fair point. Fair point.
yeah, and so folks, I think the goal should just be to learn, figure it out, whatever that means for you. If it's taking a weekend class, there's a few people that having a ton of success doing giving these weekend classes, and I've seen the success. I measure success by what are the people doing coming out of those classes, and
Hmm.
they feel empowered and they're doing something, and there are other people that are buying the For Dummies book. But I think the thing I'm beholden to is to get started.
Yeah.
because what's going to happen here fairly quickly is um, there's this saying, obviously the elephant in the room is sort of, is AI going to take your job? But, I'm a firm believer that AI is not going to take your job. What's going to take your job is somebody else using AI when you're not, right?
Yeah.
So
That's a
you
great
you want
great
you
point.
want to start and be ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question. Let me pose that differently. Where do you see all this going? And I know it's like kind of tough to answer, but where do you see AI going in the future?
Well, yeah, as you know, I've spent a lot of time doing research in this area. I do see many, many positives. This is definitely a step change in our first world society, right? There may be other societies that unfortunately don't see the immediate benefit, but definitely in our society here that we have, we'll see a ton of productivity benefit for the people that are using it. I do think that whereas I used to have a higher level of concern for impact to, say, our job market, our labor market, I still have such concerns, but less at the urgent level.
Hmm.
And that's because I've seen where, for example, to run an AI agent, which I've done many, um, actually costs something from a cost perspective, a compute
Interesting.
perspective. And those costs, depending on the complexity of the work, start to look a lot similar to, labor costs as they are today. And so there is a way for us to compete, right? For the, and that excites me because before, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when I just saw this thing coming in, I was like, oh man, it's going to be a decimation. But I think in the future we'll definitely have some leveling out, as long as our elected leaders should be looking at this and ensuring that the true cost of running these types of systems, the burden of that true cost is passed on to the companies that are buying these products. And I think that will allow a fair playing field. So I see
Hmm.
transformation. I see new industries being built. I see our children, even our children now, are making video games on the weekend, right? An endeavor that's taking them is they design something quickly in their mind, and now it's a video game they could play on a laptop, and these things in a few minutes. These things wouldn't be possible without this transformational technology. So it opens up new ways to be creative, new ways to be entrepreneurial, new ways to um, provide value at your workplace. So I see value, but we need to manage that as a humanity.
Yeah. Huh, that's a lot of wisdom there. I think that's an interesting point too about, the cost of AI usage is not zero. I mean, there's a significant cost in some cases, and that cost may be what levels the playing field. It's not that a human employee costs 100,000 and an AI costs zero. So obviously you'll go with the AI. There's that cost there.
Yeah, there's definitely, and that cost is significant. And so one of the things that I'd like to see, I was sharing this with you, a few weeks back, that I'd like to see our elected officials, for example, pay a little closer look at that. I think as long as I'm coming from the venture capital space as well, but as long as the open AIs or the larger firms can get this
Yeah,
vast amount of capital, then and then turn around and sell. Gen AI capabilities for a fractional amount, then I think that that's unfair, right? So if we have some regulation in that space, that would be really helpful. Therefore, a company could automate some meaningful use case, but it costs them 200,000 a year worth of electricity and compute and storage and all of this stuff, and maybe a human could say, hey, I could do it better than that, and they could do it for 150,000. Then I think we've balanced out our economy there. So it's an important thing for them to look at.
yeah.
Mm.
It's a really interesting point. Well, I've got one more question on AI, and then I do want to switch topics here. But we've talked a lot about the upside. What are some things that concern you? And obviously, there's the sort of like maximalist, like, is this Terminator? Are we looking at a Skynet situation? But, kind of the sort of hyperbole aside, like, what are the things that concern you about AI?
Uh, any system that is trained on data from the past can ultimately have some type of bias and influence the future, right?
Hmm.
And so what I mean, and if we become super dependent on these capabilities, where I even see it happening the other day, I was having a meeting and someone was sort of, my next meeting was pinging me about my lunch preferences, and I farmed that entire thing out to ChatGPT. I literally copied the text message, threw it into ChatGPT with a link to the menu and said, "Hey, pick my lunch to get, I don't have time to focus on this." And I think if we get so used to I don't have time to focus on this, I don't have time to fact check this, or I just trust this thing wholeheartedly, I think that we could have some impact. So, the negative is we have an intelligence attrition, like our own human
Interesting.
intelligence attrition. And so that's something that we have to be careful of. What type of, before the calculator, I mean, calculator is very necessary, but before a digital calculator, people, in when I read or watch documentaries in the Einstein times, these guys are doing mathematics on a whiteboard with calculations in the mind, and not too many people around that are doing that way because we have calculators. So if we
Yeah.
have reasoning machines, then I worry that we see some attrition in our own ability to reason. So again, something for us to watch and monitor and ensure that we don't become lesser than the thing that we've created in the endeavor that we dominated. We're not as strong as the woolly mammoth or whatever, but we were able to outthink that woolly mammoth every time. That was our thing. So we need to keep that thing.
Hmm. Yeah. It's weird how the weakness of AI is actually humans.
Yeah,
We might be the weak link in the chain.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. Actually, I said that was the last question, but I have one more, just, anecdotally. I've noticed when I very first started using I feel like the quality of output was better. I don't, is that, and like, I don't know. I almost feel like, in the beginning, it had only human data. And now so much of the data on the internet is AI generated. And it kind of, I wonder, do you think it's like kind of cannibalizing itself where, it's reading AI data and reaching AI conclusions, which makes AI data, which then is cannibalized by more AI. Is that happening, you think, or am I imagining that?
No, that's 100% what's happening. There's some alarming percentage of how much um, new content on the internet has been AI generated. And
Hmm.
then to your point, the AI sort of trainer, the companies that are training these new models, they scrape up that new data and then they train a new model, and it's this vicious cycle. So I think for consumer AI capabilities, that's just going to be a risk. And maybe someone shows up with some ability to filter out
Hmm.
new things from there's an entrepreneurial opportunity for someone, right? Within your business context and your organizational context, you're going to be feeding your own organizational data
Right.
into there. So you definitely don't want to be dealing with raw, just generic responses in a business context. You want to be preparing your own data, leveraging your own content. There's this investment bank that I did some consulting for, and I was showing them that, hey, you could they had treasure troves. Every deal that they did or were a part of had like a data room of like 3,000, 6,000 documents, right? Um, and now they're able to sort of plug those documents, if you will, into their new AI capability that they have. And that informs the next set of deals they have because it sees the decisions they've made in the past, the
Hmm.
documents, so that's how you use it. You don't want to depend on the generically trained data in a business organizational context.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Dean, let's switch topics here because there's a couple other things I wanted to get to, and I do want to be respectful of your time. You've been really generous with your time here, but just you've led a bunch of different teams, and leadership is always such an interesting concept. There's 100 right ways to do it, 100 wrong ways to do it. What's your high level take on leadership, and what are some of the factors that have shaped that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think to your points, I've led large teams, especially at Capital One, at GlaxoSmithKline. I had a large global distributed team. So I've seen, um, various different opportunities, challenges, and successes as well. I think that the things I would share is as a leader, I've found that it was my job to get out in front of the team and to build runway, right?
Hmm.
And so what that means is your sole job is you empower, enable the team. You get them the tools they need. You get them everything they need. You get them. You set the direction and let them know what the outcome looks like, right? And then your job is to ensure that they always have road to drive on. We're going to New York. There's always going to be a road the next mile, the next mile. You're out in front of that next mile, laying roadway for them to drive. And so whether that be people would call, give me a call and say, "Hey, Dean, we're stuck here. Um, this is the challenge." And I felt like my job at that point when I hung up the phone with them was to look at my Rolodex or look at whatever I have, my resources, to see what's the next thing I could do to build some road. Is there a phone number is there someone else that I could call, a relationship that I've built to say, "Hey, my team is saying they're working with your team and they're stuck here. Is there a way we could get it moving forward?" And that's how a leader adds value, sort of adding runway. And so, and then the next thing I would share is that I've learned it's a team. It's not a family. All the people that are saying it's a family, it's not. We have our families at home. Um, and our families are based on just different it's a different mechanism, right? You're not going to fire your wife or your mom or whoever, and that's just not how this thing works. But a team is a very specific construct, especially for those of us who've done sports. A team is based on performance, right? So once we understand that we are on a team, then begs the question, what's the game that we're playing and what's the scoreboard? Right?
Hmm.
Where is the scoreboard? And what does it take to get points on that scoreboard? And it's that simple, the relationship, right? Now, if we're doing all the things we're supposed to do, then the points are going to go on that scoreboard in a sort of predictable way. And if we're not, then there are not going to be any points. And since our shared goal is to get points on that scoreboard, we can have conversations about why that may or may not be happening, right? So it's important that people understand that they're a team, not a family. Figure out the game you're playing, and figure out how to get points on the scoreboard. It might be somewhat of a controversial take because I know people are looking, you spend so much time at work and you're looking for different um, sort of types of relations. Doesn't mean you can't be close. I've seen many, just watching sports as I do, I've seen many teammates become close and build lifelong bonds and
Yeah.
relationships. But they're still on a team when that whistle blows. So that's important.
Yeah, what an interesting distinction there. You're right. Families are not performance based,
Mm,
but teams are. And you're right. I mean, being on a team doesn't mean it's this cold, distant relationship. Teams are often very, very close, but you're right. It is a very different model, and as you said, a different mechanism, which is an interesting way to look at it. Yeah,
yeah,
that's really insightful, Dean. I really appreciate you sharing that.
yeah.
One quick follow up on that. Where did how did you come by that? Is that something that you just developed on your own? Did you read any books on it? Did you have any mentors in this space?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I became an executive leader when I was like 32 years old. And I was fairly thrust into a large scale situation. I had a global team, and I had a lot of imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, I've picked one apple too much this time, right? So ultimately, I had to figure out. how to be comfortable in my own skin doing this. I was in a situation where there were more mature people than me that were reporting to me, maybe had different educational backgrounds at that time, had experiences of their own, right? And I had to figure out what my value was to bring to these people. And so that's where my framework came
Hmm.
about providing value, being able to do all these things. In terms of knowledge, I read a lot of autobiographies,
Hmm.
like leadership autobiographies. These are the free advisors of the world, right? So I've read from Bob Iger, um, all the way, yeah, whether it be Elon Musk, Bob Iger,
Phil Knight, I know
Bill,
you
Bill
recommended to
Gates,
me.
Phil Knight, Shoe Dog. That is a Phil Knight Shoe Dog is an amazing one. I would recommend it to anyone simply because, and I love it because it's told by Phil Knight, and written by Phil Knight, who is a really good, the founder of Nike. He's just a really good narrator, right? He's really good at telling the story. But then the story he told, you'd think it's this, we did everything right and we're so smart and we built this big company and now people wear Nike forever. And it wasn't. It was this slapdash, amateur show of, like you're sitting there reading the book and it's like, how did they even get to the next step, right? But it was a testament to the fact that you're not always going to have it figured out. There is no such thing as being an expert. All there is getting up and um, putting your best shoe on and just trying to move forward every day. And that's what I got from Shoe Dog. Another good one I read was Indra Nooyi. She was a former chairperson at PepsiCo. So yeah, I've read them all. Warren Buffett,
Yeah.
and I picked something different from them all. Yeah,
Yeah. There's that great Phil Knight quote. Ah, man, I hope I don't butcher it here. The cowards never started, the weak died along the way, and that just leaves us, which, man, if that
exactly.
doesn't get you fired up.
I love it, man. I love
Yeah.
it.
All right. Well, Dean, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, this podcast, I like to kind of bring it back whenever I can to projects, and getting things done, getting meaningful work done. So you've been a part of dozens, maybe hundreds of projects, various sizes, little ones, big ones, complex ones. What, in your mind, separates a successful project from an unsuccessful project?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Uh, Successful projects are ones in which uh, what the goal is,
Hmm.
right? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Sounds simple. You'd be surprised how many projects are embarked upon that don't
Yeah.
have a particular goal in mind. I remember giving you an example. This is one that I share all the time, and
Yes.
it's Red Lobster. It's the
My
one the
favorite.
one
My
the one
favorite.
that gets me fired up.
Share it with us right now, please.
Yeah, man, I will. I share it here. So there was this thing I read that so there's a new CEO at Red Lobster now. But back when they were really, really struggling, they tried to do this promotion. It was like endless shrimp or something like that. And so you could go in, start ordering shrimp, and you'd order the endless shrimp, and they'd bring you shrimp forever, right? And any layperson could sort of think, like, well, shrimp's expensive, it's seafood, and how long could you keep this up? What were you trying to achieve with this program, this project, right? And so when it inevitably failed, they asked the CFO, like, what were you guys trying to do? He said, hey, we were trying to increase foot traffic to our locations, right? Okay, you're trying to increase foot traffic. But is that the thing that you actually cared about, right? Or is the thing you actually cared about was like increasing your revenue and reducing cost, right? Because you actually did the inverse. And if you knew what this project was supposed to achieve, after you did it the first day, you would have sort of looked at your revenue and saw that, well, you're not making any more money than selling the other things, right? And you'd look at your costs and see that your costs have gone sky high because you're giving away free shrimp. And maybe you would have terminated that project if you knew what the project was about. But here they were, the smartest people with all the smartest educational backgrounds, doing a project without knowing. what the outcome, what the goal is that they had in mind and how they would measure that. So I tell that one all the time. Know what it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Have incremental points where you're sort of figuring out, let's not wait 2 years to figure out that we failed. Let's have incremental success. Let's slice this down. Let's have deliverables that are coming, and then let's treat those iterations as learning points, just like a lab experiment. We learn this experiment one, and we take that into experiment two, and we keep iterating, pivoting, getting better, stopping the things that don't work, doing the things that do work, and then maybe if we're lucky enough, some success will happen.
Hmm. Yeah, that's truer words were never said about the understanding the problem. I heard one time a well-defined problem is half solved, and I really like that. So many times, or even, you think you know what you're aiming at, but it's not the whole picture. Like I think exactly like you said with the Red Lobster, like, yeah, nobody's saying foot traffic doesn't matter at all, but what's the whole picture here? And then understanding not just like a sliver of the problem, but the entirety of the problem.
Right.
So yeah, man, great story, very well said. Well, Dean, my last question for you. I think we've covered some amazing ground here today. This has been just an incredibly insightful, interview, and I'm really grateful for you taking the time to do this. If people want to hear more about what you are talking about, or want to work with you, or really just want to interact with you more and cover some more ground here, where can they go to find more information from you?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm active on LinkedIn. So Odean, Odean, last name May, Maye. Please reach out and connect with me. I'm excited to just learn what you're doing, because I'm excited about what's happening in the world across industries and organizations. If you want to see some of the stuff I've been doing consulting wise, take a look at acuvero.com, acuvero.com. And as a bonus, if you go to autonomous.io, Autonomos, autonomous.io, you'll see a bit of a sneak preview of a really big and innovative and impactful agentic AI project that I'm working on. And yeah, reach out about that too if you want to learn more.
And I'll put all those links in the show notes in case you didn't get a chance to write those down. So I'll put all those in there. And
Awesome.
man, I've learned from listening to you for a few years now. When you say you're working on something big and exciting, it's worth listening. So I will personally be checking that out.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Peter, I want to say before, I want to thank you for having me on, but I
Yeah,
also want to say it's exciting the work that you're doing. I remember you telling me about this idea you had some time back, and to see you doing it, to see the engagement, to see the following that you built is really exciting, and I'm proud of the work that you've done. So thanks for having me on.
man, I really appreciate you saying that. Dean May, my friend, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Awesome. Thanks again.